So this is going to focus on rearing early stage bass in indoor systems. So I know you guys have probably been hearing about like, raising fish all day, so I can briefly go over obviously the overview stuff and really focus on stuff that we did. A lot of it's similar to Pete, we work together. So these are the three main parts of bass culture now. Do the nursery ponds, outdoors, bring them in for feed training, bring it back out for grow out. The goal of what we were researching is to improve that nursery stage, also remove ponds from it, and then also kind of combine it with that feed training. So kind of take those two stages, make it one, and then continue with the rest of the process. So advantages of the current process with the outdoor nursery feed training and then outdoor grow out, it's low tech, less labor intensive, which ultimately reduces costs. It represents a natural habitat, and then with that has a natural live feed culture. With fertilization, there can be abundant live feed, which provides obviously ample food for those larval bass to survive better. Disadvantages, there's a lot of different reasons. The main reason kind of as a whole is just there's a lot less control outside. Weather's an issue. You don't really know how much you have, predators, stuff like that. And not having control is probably a very frustrating thing when you're trying to make some money. So to get some more control, all these advantages are pretty much opposite disadvantages from outdoors. More control, water quality, temperature, year-round culture, make more efficient use of your space instead of just having open fields with a ton of ponds, and then higher biosecurity can also help with some survival as well. And these are pictures from our system. So recirculating systems, it's the water that's in it is in the tanks, goes through filters, puts back in the tank. So three major parts. We have a rearing tank, that's where the fish are. Mechanical filtration, we use a sand filter. That's what takes out the solids, so the waste and uneaten feed. And then another really important part is that biofilter. So the water pouring over top those beads, there's bacteria that grow on those beads that take ammonia from the water, convert it to nitrates. Ammonia is toxic. Nitrates are not, unless they're at very, very, very high levels. So that's important. There's a lot of different minor parts to RAS systems as well, like UV lights, oxygenators, stuff like that. That's all kind of customizable, but the three major parts are presented here. A major disadvantage of intensive culture with all that control is high cost. There's a very high cost initially with the complex system, and then also a lot of costs associated with labor. So, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are your own labor, so it's even more important. But not only is labor intensive maintaining the system, but raising live feed is also pretty labor intensive, and it also requires a whole new knowledge of a new organism in order to feed bass. So to reduce these costs and improve intensification of bass culture, we focused on kind of reducing that reliance on live feed. So live feed is important. So they provide digestive enzymes for the fish. They trigger that natural feeding response, which helps with feed acceptance. And it also stays in the water column longer. Some disadvantages, however, is that one is labor intensive and you have to buy feed for your feed, which is never a great idea. Introducing live organisms into your system comes with a natural risk of disease or infection. And then between species and also just batches of the same species, there's pretty inconsistent nutritional value. So if you want to make sure you're consistently giving your fish high value or high nutritional value stuff, it's not always the most ideal. So the challenges and disadvantages with early dry feed introduction, they pretty much mirror the advantages of live feed. So live feed increases feed acceptance, dry feed doesn't. It doesn't stay in the water column as long. It doesn't provide that natural feeding response. And then also it degrades the water quality. So for larval fish, you have to make sure there's consistent feed availability. So you feed a ton. And when you feed a ton, yeah, they eat a bunch of it, but a lot of it settles to the bottom, and then nutrients leach, it degrades, and it really tanks your water quality. So not always ideal. Some work has been done. It was presented at the last one we did. So and currently it's about like 2 weeks after hatching. That's when, with some decent survival, they've found that you can switch them to dry feed or start the transition. But our objective here was to see if we could do it a bit earlier, see how they respond, and see if we can improve intensive larval culture by reducing live feed. So it was a pretty simple study. We had 2 feeding regimes. One is live feed only, Artemia nobili throughout, and then the other one received Artemia for the first 2 days, and then was co-fed for the rest of the time. So at the start, it was dry feed first, and then wait about 20 minutes, then go into live feed to kind of supplement back. And then as the larval period progressed, we reduced the amount of live feedings in between the dry feeding. So it started about like 6, actually that's gonna be, yeah. So we did 6 feeds a day with dry feed every 2 hours to ensure that there was consistent feed, just as much feed as they could possibly consume. In between those 6 feedings at the start, like I said, we did 6 more live feedings in between. As it progressed, we were down to about 1 live feed in the morning and then 1 live feed at the end of the day between our 6 dry feedings. Pretty much just to turn live feed from a necessity into more like a supplementary feed to our dry feed. It was a bit labor intensive, so one thing we had to do, as I mentioned about water quality, is we cleaned the tanks 3 times a day. That involved going in with a squeegee, siphoning the side, or siphoning the bottom, and then also taking stuff off the sides. So it was very labor intensive. And our diet was formulated based on commercial feeds. And then this is our system. So rearing tanks in the back, we have a few sand filters, and those big tanks on top, those are our biofilters. Those are our water conditions. The features in the tank, we had a 100 micrometer mesh standpipe, and then we put the air stone right at the base of that standpipe because larval bass, they're not that good at swimming when they're that young. So as the water's going over the standpipe, sometimes they'll stick, and then they're kind of screwed at that point. So we put the air stone right there, and it kind of bubbles them away from the standpipe, away from the mesh, and keeps them alive. And then these are the results. So these are the important part. We found that our co-feeding group has significantly higher weight, or not significantly higher, almost significant, 0.06 p-value, so that close. But a much higher weight gain, and then a significant increase in survival. So like I said, this was a very labor-intensive process. We were pretty much there all the time, but we did achieve really, really high survivals. And with that co-feeding group, we saw a 5% increase in survival compared to just our team. So they grew larger, and we saw an increase in survival. And they accepted the dry feed at 7 days post hatch, and then at that 25 days, those were feed trained individuals. So we took that nursery section, brought it inside, intensified it, introduced dry feed, and pretty much eliminated the need for that nursery, the feed training stage. So then from here, 25 days post hatch, you continue growing inside, or you can continue with other practices, let them go a little bit bigger, put them outside to do grow up. You've seen these pictures before because Pete had on both. But we did another bass study, and then the study we did with bass on that system, the table's up top. So in that study, we had dry feed group, which received no live feed at all. As you can see, didn't really work. But we also had a co-feeding group. The difference between co-feeding in the first study and this study was, in this study, they were co-fed for 1 week and then solely on dry feed. And then in the first group, they were co-fed for all 3 weeks of the study. The growth and survival is pretty level across the board for the live feed groups in both studies. However, we found that co-feeding for only 1 week did not increase growth compared to the live feed group, and it also saw a significant decrease in survival. But that co-feeding for 3 weeks in that first study saw the highest survival and also the highest growth. So there's a lot on this, but it's mostly just like bits and pieces of stuff that I thought about as we've gone through this. Water quality is very important and requires a lot of labor to maintain. So it's just something that is important to keep an eye on. I know I mentioned RAS systems. We actually technically did a semi-RAS system. We were exchanging 20% of the system volume a day to just make the water quality as good as possible. The right feed selection is important. Pellet stability to make sure that if the fish are ingesting the feed, it has a high nutritional value and not too much nutrient leaching has occurred. Reducing cannibalism is important. just constant feed supply, try to keep as uniform sizes of fish in the tank as possible. When they're old enough, it can handle handling, definitely size grade a decent amount. But another thing is to just make sure that you feed in excess and all the fish in the tank consume whatever feed you're putting in. So if you use something too large, only a few fish can eat it, then your gap in size is gonna widen. And then I already mentioned kind of how we do co-feeding. So pretty much we found that with that co-feeding, you can start feeding dry feed at 7 days post-hatch. It eliminates that need to bring them inside for feed training and produces larger fish and also increases survival. It is more labor intensive, but with that increase in survival, maybe that increase in production can kind of offset those costs. Thank you.